Jesus Christ.
Big act to follow there. Where's that camera out of you? So. Shuffle that way a little bit. Which way? That way, towards it. Oh.
Well, I don't know how to follow that one. Just before we start, I've been given the honour, to be fair, just as I've turned up at the ceremony today by Jen's mum, to hand over the wedding certificate to them both. So just going to start with that. Jen can stop eating this. Oh, this one's for Glenn. Son says to his dad, "Dad, I think I'm a moth." The dad replies, "What do you mean, son?" His son says again, "Dad, I'm telling you, I think I'm a moth." The dad, now very confused, asks, "What are you telling me, son? I think you need to see a doctor." And the son says, "Well, I was going to go and see a doctor, but then I saw your light was on." Thanks for that, bro. Just getting our toes wet with that one, it does get funny. No, seriously though, all jokes aside, it really is great to see so many faces in here today. The one time in a generation, everyone in the room will be a guest. I'm here all week. I'm surprised to see Steve here today, to be fair, after we dragged him out of the Warwick at 7 o'clock this morning. Sorry, Jim.
It felt like today would never arrive. It's fantastic we're all finally here together celebrating the marriage of Jen and Steve. COVID-19 has thrown up many challenges for the two of them as they tried to plan their special day. I'm sure at times it felt like they should just sack it off and return to Steve's homeland in South Africa. I know from the conversation we've had, Steve was keen to cancel and invest the money into fresh premium bonds. I've known Steve for 15 years now, having just both finished our GCSEs. At different schools, we have both decided to put ourselves through the selection process for a job at McDonald's. Now let me tell you, the 2.5-minute interview at McDonald's is tough. We had to be able to spell our full names and count to 10 to be deemed acceptable candidates. Fortunately, we both could. It was after the interview that this random lad walked up to me. He said, "Hi mate, I couldn't borrow your phone, could I? I have no credit." Whilst waving his Alcatel A10 in my face, I was confused. Firstly, that somebody had worn a pair of stone-coloured tracksuit bottoms to an interview, and secondly, I'd never seen an Alcatel phone before in my life. Thought, poor lad, so I lent him my BlackBerry. In a fantastic stroke of luck, it turned out Steve lived a minute away, so I spent the next 2 years travelling to sixth form in Suzuki Swift. Thanks, Linda.
Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name's James. One of many today, apparently. But my friends like to call me Wheaty. So I feel privileged that Steve's given me the honour of being one of his best men today. I was fortunate enough to first meet Steve around 13 years ago when we both worked together at McDonald's. Now I say work together loosely, as to be honest, I only saw him there every 3 months when he needed money to fund his university shenanigans. However, it wasn't until one of the infamous McDonald's crew nights where Steve really came to my attention. But one in particular stands out, which was held at the Lodge Park Social Club. The night's events included someone throwing a chair through a glass door. Now, just to confirm, it wasn't Steve, as the story would have been a lot funnier, to be honest. But it was actually Steve's charm with the ladies that caught my eye. During the evening, surprising, I know. So, during the evening's events, he not only had 1, 2, 3 ladies on his arm, to be honest with you, of the females in attendance, which, you know, at the time it did make me think, how's he managed that? So, I mean, even to this day, he's never revealed his secrets to me. But that was the beginning of our friendship. Over the subsequent years, me and Steve have bonded over our shared love of Fever nightclub, football, and of course, Aston Villa. However, our friendship wasn't truly cemented until the time we spent together in Ibiza, more of which you'll hear a bit more about later on today.
Afternoon all, my name's Pete and I am on Instagram if anyone wants to drop me a follow after the ceremony. It's at Pete Hemming. I first met Steve over 20 years ago playing under-9s football for Fecknell. He was in the A team and I was in the B team. And in the following years, not a lot's changed, it was. In 2004 I was fortunate enough to be reunited with Steve at St Augustine's, and over the years we've not looked back since. We've travelled the world together, laughed together, cried together, probably a few too many tears, and we shared memories that will last a lifetime, but more on those later. Now, we were never really concerned with girls in high school. We preferred to spend our Friday nights playing cricket at Morton Stanley. Change the page. Funnily enough, later in life, we formed a closer bond with our counterparts from Kingsley, some of whom are here today, literally on this table just in front of me. And one Friday night, the Kingsley lads turned up at Morton while we were playing cricket. Now at this point, it's important for me to point out that they were with a group of girls, something we were yet to experience as a group of virgins. They were doing what most lads, sorry, they were doing what most 14-year-old lads do on a night out, on a Friday night. They were getting pissed. And this really provided us with an epiphany. We were the in-betweeners in this town. And having your own wickets thrown at you can be a real low point in yourself. It's a toss-up between that or the time that the Batchley Terror Squad chased us off the AstroTurf. They asked us if they could play football with us, and we said no. So they said, if you don't let us play, we're going to steal your ball. So we did what any brave young lads would do. We waited for the ball to go out of play. We picked that ball up and we ran as far away from Batchley as we could get. But the joke's on them because we've still got the ball. It wasn't until Steve's 18th birthday that we really cemented ourselves as the top dogs in sixth form. A blaze had just folded and Luke, Josh and George were left unaware. All their mates had failed their GCSEs and they had nowhere to turn. So they came back begging us with a towel between their legs to join our group, and we obliged. And I believe it was Luke, in fact himself, the dirty bar steward, who had the phone number of the local stripper, Madam Whiplash. Clues in the name for that one. So we chipped in a fiver and threw Steve a party at the town hall. And at this point, it's important that I thank Madam Whiplash for bringing Steve out of his shell with her sizable assets. All that aside, I do count myself very lucky to have been able to call him my best friend for the last 17 years.
It was at university that Steve really came out of his shell. I remember playing Football Manager for 6 hours on a train to the deepest depths of Wales. That excitement became dreadless as soon as I ended up in bloody Aberystwyth. There I met Steve, who now looked like a BTEC Liam Gallagher. Steve gave me a full tour of the town and everything it had to offer. This included one nightclub, which also doubled up as the town's pier, 2 kebab shops, a Wetherspoons and a Burton's menswear, and Steve was dressed from head to toe in it. Safe to say, I would never be returning to Aberystwyth, and neither was Steve.
Something most of Wales, actually.
It's funny because Steve didn't originally go to Aberystwyth University, as he did touch on earlier. Now I must apologise to Glenn and Linda at this stage because I'm going to explain how Steve failed and subsequently departed Aston University. Now we've got a few of the Aston boys here, if they could give us a wave over in that corner. Could Liam Newbold not make it, no? No, it's great to see him. One of them's travelled 1,000 miles to be here, so that's really, really great. But as Steve went to uni, it was time for him to find himself and cast aside his former straight edge self. This meant going out most nights of the week and chasing a bit of skirt. Unfortunately, nothing had changed, and we were still failing to pull. Whether that was due to the fact we were going out in shirt, tie and trousers, something that I think Tom Frank still does. Some have also blamed it on the fact that he used to sit in Alex Cuthbert's room every night, playing DJ Earworm. But if we're honest, the blame lies solely at the door of Steve's best friend in year 1, Jamal, or as Steve called him, J-Bomb, which didn't go down too well as he was half Iraqi. Entering exam season after being led astray by one member of the group who can't be named for legal reasons, Steve was left panicked, anxious and unprepared. He's decided the best course of action was to copy Jamal's work. Ultimately, Steve failed, and the rest is history.
As we all know, at times life can be quite straining financially, particularly when you decide to do your first year of university twice. But this was never a problem for Steve, as he's one of the most frugal men around. A staunch commitment to investing his money into premium bonds throughout his formative years put Steve in good stead to cope with the demands ahead of him. Now, one of life's biggest events is when you purchase a brand new car. So Steve, premium bonds in hand, and a little bit extra from a couple of the monthly raffle wins he had on it as well, set foot on the search for his new prized asset. Now, any normal person would head to a car dealership and take a look around. However, it appears in Steve's case, he decided to take a trip to the local Currys. As the next time we saw him, he arrived in what can only be described as a slightly large washing machine with 4 wheels. Fortunately, when we were given the tour, it had 4.5 seats and a steering wheel. But in typical Steve style, that was about it. He clearly didn't want anything flashy, like electric windows or key fob central locking. Oh no. So, but in his defence, the appliance has lasted him 8 years so far, and by all accounts, it's pretty cheap to run. Which I suppose isn't a surprise when you only have to fill it up with a bit of fabric softener and a tablet. But hey, not only is Steve good at investing his money, he's pretty brilliant at recovering debts from his friends. How could we forget the time when Steve lent Jack Sharp 99p for a cheeseburger at McDonald's? Steve certainly didn't. As a year later, he decided it was time to call in the debt, reminding Jack the money was owed. A very frugal man, indeed.
As time went by, Steve became more open to spending this hard-earned money. And in the year following university, Steve was working in a job in Birmingham that he really hated. Now, in his defence, if anyone's travelled on the 45-minute Birmingham to Redditch train with 27 stops, honestly, you'll understand why. But we all came to hate, I said that wrong, we all came to dread the Friday is it fever text. Now, when I say this, I mean every single Friday. And I'm sure at this point there should have been some genuine concerns for Steve's mental well-being. But rather than delve too deeply into that one, we just did what any good friends would do, and we got in fever with him. Now, after a 26th straight Friday spell in fever, it was time to expand our horizons and go to Ibiza. And when we got to Ibiza, Steve, 2 weeks off from the job he hated, decided it was time to have fun. And he got that drunk on the first night that when we got to the door at Ushuaia for Avicii, the bouncer said, "Not tonight, mate."
Now somehow, following a miraculous post-concert recovery, Steve was back on the march and looking to head to the Strip. It was time for Steve to make up for lost ground, and he thought a good way of achieving this was by whipping off his top, purchasing a bottle of absinthe, and heading to the Strip topless. By the time we got there, he was absolutely soaked in beer due to constant, unrelenting jacuzzis.
Speaking of nights out, it must be mentioned just how loyal Steve is. If any of his friends are in trouble, Steve is the first in the mix to confront the aggressor. Is there a better example of this than Pop World 2014? A poor old Righty had found himself in a sticky spot, not knowing where to turn, until his knight in shining armour appeared. Steve guessed. Unfortunately for Steve and Josh, the aggressors were bigger than them, and Steve walked away with a black eye. And a lesson learned.
Now this brings us nicely to the stag do. And at events like this, it's always great to see distant friends, particularly our London boy and Potter legend, Tom Frank. Now Tom had aligned himself with Captain Chaos for the day. The Oxford Dictionary defines chaos as George Alexander Nibs. Somewhat unsurprisingly, the two of them were in the thick of it early doors in the afternoon, with a group close to our proximity. And this led to one of the funniest scenes I can ever remember witnessing, and I genuinely wish I had the CCTV to show you all. Flying through the Steve sick sodden floor, there's more on that one later as well, one of these men, flying through the air, has committed one of the most heinous two-footed tackles on Franco. It was something that even Roy Keane would have been appalled by. Now Franco, bless him, He usually turns like butter. But this time, he got up quicker than I've ever seen anyone move to confront the assailant, and the handbags commenced. As I glance to my right, I see Steve careering through the dance floor, dildo in... Oh, no. Dildo in hand. He's in the face of the biggest one in the group. He was looking like the wild staring Raider getting in his face. But thankfully, the handbags were over almost as soon as they've begun.
Now, throughout all these stories, there's been one constant in Steve's life: his beautiful bride, Jen. As Steve said already today, Steve met Jen through the popular dating app Tinder, and it was only by chance and a lot of persuasion on Steve's behalf that he managed to get the contract over the line. That's because, before Steve, Jen had actually been on a date with Steve's close friend, Ben Ashford. Good afternoon, Ben. Fortunately for Steve, as you can tell, it didn't quite work out for Jen and Ben, as today could have looked a lot different.
I really must give Jen a lot of credit for putting up with Steve over the years and taking that burden off of us. Not only has she taught him that when you go out for a curry you need to use the cutlery provided rather than your fingers, but also the amount of time she must hear Steve "I'm bloated" say "I'm bloated," which is often followed by a bout of projectile vomiting. In my eyes, the woman deserves a medal.
Funny you should say that. I remember a horror show a few years back. We were in Lloyd's having a few drinks. It might have been the time Vardy scored a backer to beat Germany. Stevie and Jen had been over the road having a curry before meeting us. As you can imagine, Stevie was bloated. So he made a wise choice and turned onto the wine to get it down easier. That was in fact a bad idea. Sick all over the bar again, and it didn't stop there. I woke up to 10 messages from Jen asking for help as he was being sick everywhere and she didn't know what to do. He was still at his mum and dad's at this point, and I believe they're still clearing the sick up from the ceiling today. Let's not pretend Jen's innocent either. One of our first times meeting, we ended up in a prestigious cocktail bar called Fever Cirque. After many blacks and blues, the night was a bit of a blur, and for Jen, she went home with one shoe on. Legend has it, she was back uptown the next day asking the market traders if it's in the right shoe. Any luck?
So at this time, I'd just like to point out a couple of key areas for you to watch out for this evening, just to avoid any unforeseen accidents. Now, it's not his go-to place, but just keep your eye on the dance floor later this evening. All the dancing he does can upset his stomach, so just be careful. Unfortunately though, his personal favourite remains close to the bar area, which, again, for some reason, he seems to think is inconspicuous when being sick really isn't. But again, I can't knock him. It does give him easy access to get another drink. So, again, if you do spot any signs, any issues this evening, do not hesitate to raise your concerns to one of the groomsmen, preferably Andy, Macca or Pete, as I'll be clocking off after this. I'm sure I'll be happy to help you. On a more serious note though, Steve, it's truly an honour being stood here as one of your best men today. Looking back now, it's safe to say at the point we met, I didn't envisage how our friendship would blossom into what it is today. You are caring and considerate to everyone, and a great friend. And I'm so happy this day has finally arrived for you both. Jen, when Steve met you, everyone could see just how happy you made him. And everyone who knows you both well will say you are the perfect couple. If Louis could talk, he would agree too. Although he may be a little upset, he didn't quite receive the invite today.
Yeah, I'd just like to say a few words about the kind of friend Steve is. I don't think there's a greater testament to the man than to say that I've never heard a bad word said about him in my life. I don't think I should look at him, so I'm about to go. And from a personal standpoint, whenever I need him, he's always been patient, loyal and understanding. And I couldn't wish for a better person to give me the honour of being his...
Now don't worry, I won't keep boring you with how good of a friend Steve is, as it's time to wrap this up. If you could just take a moment to thank everybody involved today, firstly Jen and Steve's parents. I'm sure you're all very proud today, and deservedly so. Thank you to Jen's bridesmaids who all look wonderful, I'm sure you agree. To the ushers, Andy, and the Page boys and Flower girls. And to all of you for taking the time out to share Jen and Steve's day. Now, it wouldn't be right for us to end a speech for Steve Guest's wedding without paying homage to his greatest creation.
Oh yes.
Oh, yes!
Thank you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you could all please stand and raise a glass to Mr. and Mrs. Guest. Jacuzzi!